How are you talking to yourself about sobriety? And how do you talk to yourself about drinking? Language really matters. And I work with a lot of women who tell me that they need my help to start being good again, or they need to get back on the straight and narrow, and they're ready to knuckle down and abstain. Do you notice how all of those phrases and words have an element of restriction and hard work within them? Like, there's a sense of being good, but also being deprived and missing out. And that's not a good thing, because no one wants to knuckle down and get on the straight and narrow in the long term. You know, no one wants that really. It doesn't sound like much fun. So that's how many people talk about quitting drinking. Whereas when it comes to alcohol, we tend to use phrases like, I'm going to treat myself to a few drinks, or I deserve it, or I'm letting my hair down and relaxing, getting a bit merry, getting a bit tipsy. Now notice how all of that language sounds so much better, right? And your subconscious definitely picks up on that. So now I've mentioned this difference to you, I want you to be onto yourself and listening out for when you're using that kind of language in a way that isn't going to serve you. How often are you telling your subconscious that you're about to do something slightly awful and depriving, but you know, you just got to get on with it? I think we get all of this back to front, because actually it's not sobriety that's depriving, it's drinking that's restrictive and depriving. Alcohol-free living doesn't rob you of your freedom and joy and peace and happiness and sleep and good mental health. It's alcohol that takes all of that. When you're a drinker, it's like lugging around a heavy suitcase with you all the time. A suitcase full of guilt and regret and hangovers and wishing that you hadn't drunk, whilst also wondering when you'll drink again and worrying if you have enough alcohol at home and where you're going to put all the empties. So I was thinking about this suitcase analogy because I am on holiday at the moment. It's not British weather behind me. And I literally do have a suitcase with me. And I was thinking about how it's always such a pain in the ass to lug it around on the way here and check it in and wheel it along, you know. But when you're drinking, every single day is like that. You just don't realise it because you're so attached to this idea that drinking is freedom and drinking is good. You know, I'm also staying in this really sporty resort where you can do everything from yoga classes to running and paddleboarding. And I was thinking earlier about how if I was still drinking, I would have completely screwed up this holiday. I would have wasted it. I wouldn't have been much use in the mornings, which is when the majority of the activities take place. So wouldn't have made the most of that. And then I would have spent the daytime recovering just so I could, quote unquote, relax again by drinking at night. Now, do you see how that isn't freedom? Like when your life, your happiness, your joy, your holiday is dependent on the liquid you're going to put in your glass and how much you're going to have and when and where, that is restriction. I mean, talk about being on the straight and narrow. Talk about being tied to the old ball and chain. It's alcohol creating that restrictive prison. It is creating a trap for you. Yet because of this crazy world we live in, we just don't always see that because alcohol is so romanticized and we've been conditioned to look at it in a very certain way. It is bonkers when you think about it. But the good news is, if you can convince your brain that a neurotoxin like alcohol is going to bring you freedom, joy, fun and pleasure, then you can also train it to think the opposite. You can learn to change and you can learn to see the truth of what's going on. And it all starts with watching your language. You know, noticing when you are reinforcing an unhelpful story, even when you don't mean to. I just think many of us have subconsciously picked up the terminology from a lot of old-fashioned, outdated recovery programs where they talk about things like taking it one day at a time or fighting a daily battle. There's a lot of heavy negative energy around that. But sobriety doesn't have to be like that. I mean, with the women I coach, my goal is to get them to a place where they just don't think about drinking anymore and they just don't want to drink. A bit like quitting smoking. Yeah, it's, hard work at first, but you don't expect to be calling yourself a recovering nicotineaholic a decade later. Like, smoking just becomes something you used to do, and drinking can become exactly that as well. Well, that's the approach that we have at the Sober School. That's what I teach. So I'm wishing you a week of freedom, fun and joy, and a reminder that you won't find any of that at the bottom of a bottle. So go out there, just live your life alcohol free, because that's where the real freedom is.